thank you, Rosie, and everybody. Welcome to the special edition of Architecture Foundation 100 Day Studio Football Stories. So we're now going to introduce ourselves through our football biographies, not our architectural ones. And I'll hand over to Susanne Isa to introduce herself through her football life.
Yeah, I got introduced to football via my grandmother, who was born in 1906, and her regret in life was that she couldn't be a professional football player. She supported Werder Bremen because she's German. I'm half German, and on Sunday or whenever they were playing, we were not allowed to watch TV or anything like that. And in the 70s, that was quite hard going on a weekend. But I've always been interested in football, and the first World Cup that I saw was 1974, which Germany won, and Gerd Müller, whom I have in that whole team. But in the Premier League, I support Arsenal Football Club.
And David Ogunmuyiwa.
Hi. Yeah, I completely recognize Sudan's grandmother's feelings. I mean, if I could have been a football player, I would have been a football player rather than an architect or an astronaut, I said, but architect would do in the meantime. But yeah, so my football biography is a bit strange. So when I was, I'm a West Ham supporter, and that's a really strange team for me to support, mainly because I went to school in Bermondsey, and West Ham's kind of sworn rivals are Millwall. So I went to a Millwall school in a really, really kind of rough context, but as a supporter of their worst enemies. But like, my family's from Nigeria. My dad got a job there when I was younger, so we all kind of moved there for a couple of years. And I was watching Match of the Day, and it was they used to have kind of Match of the Day on TV, and it was the FA Cup final, and it was West Ham against the mighty Arsenal. West Ham at the time were a lower division team, a second division team, playing the mighty Arsenal for the FA Cup. And miraculously, I wanted to support the underdog, and miraculously, we won. But that's not the punchline. The punchline is that Nigerian television at the time was so poor that these were all repeats from years before. So this had all happened years before, and I hadn't realised it. So it was basically meant to be that I was supposed to be a West Ham supporter, and that's how I kind of explain myself to other people when they look at me strangely about why I support West Ham. Pedro.
So West Ham through Nigeria, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so football's been a part of my life since I can remember. I was born in Colombia, and in a lot of South American countries, football is a religion. It's not like a religion, it is a religion. So I played football as a boy in the park, and then as I got older, I started playing more competitively through school teams, local teams. Then I played Sunday League, and eventually I was scouted to play semi-professional football. And it got quite serious, and it got to a point in my life where I was either going to become where I was going to commit myself and dedicate myself to football or studying. I was doing my A-levels at the time, and it was quite intense. And I decided to let the football go. So in an alternative universe, in another universe, in the multiverse, there is a version of Pedro that there's either playing for England or Colombia. Well, there are two multiverses. There's a version where Pedro plays for Colombia, and there's another one where Pedro plays for England.
It's a multiverse, Pedro. It's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to say, compared to the two of you, I don't actually want to play football because I know I'd be crap at it.
Do you though?
Yeah, I do know.
Would you be a good coach? Would you be a good coach, though, Susanne?
I don't know. I don't.
Well,
know.
you know that a lot of the top coaches.
Having watched Brian Clough, I think so. Yes.
Yeah, you know, Mourinho never played. You know, Wenger never played. A lot of the top managers never played. And somehow they have a different appreciation for the game because of that. They can look at the game differently. So maybe there's a multiverse where you're the coach of the national team of either Germany or England, perhaps. Right. So moving on to our football bios. Next segment is called In Praise of. So now we're going to talk about footballing personalities that we admire, that we respect, and how we maybe link those back to architecture. And we're going to start with David on this one. David, who would you like to highlight?
I'm going to come to, this is a controversial choice because I know Pedro and I have discussed this. I'm going to come to Sergio Ramos, the irrepressible Sergio Ramos, who plays for Real Madrid. He's defended for Real Madrid, and he is famously quite a ruthless character. And I use ruthless rather than nasty, but he gets things done. And I've always kind of, I don't know, I've always been kind of admiring of people who just kind of, through sheer force of will, get stuff done. And he's kind of, if there's a goal, if it's the last, 87th minute and his team needs to go, he'll score the goal. But if he's the last man and the other team's attacking and he has to break the other guy's legs, he'll do that as well. And I just think that's really interesting in terms of that. I thought I came through this from a book that was recommended to us during our part 3, which was called The 90-Minute Manager. It's by David Bolchover and Chris Brady. And it's a kind of, slightly fanciful, but it's a kind of metaphor for how the high pressure of managing a Premiership football team is similar to managing kind of autonomous artisans into a team and making them do stuff, and who does what, and who's like a good right-hand man, and who's the kind of genius but kind of slightly frail genius, probably wouldn't get things done if you left them to it, and who's like the workhorse, and who's a water carrier, and who gets things done, and who has the amazing kind of insightful ideas, and who's the impact sub, and that sort of thing. And I think Sergio Ramos is my kind of nomination for just the ruthless guy who he's the stopper. He makes things happen. He gets things done. And he stops the opposition
by any means necessary.
By any means necessary.
So yeah, you know my feelings on this, David, about how
I think you should share it widely.
Yeah, my immediate response is, but okay, by any means necessary, but is it really necessary? Do you really have to hack? Do you really have to go out and be that nasty?
So I think it's contextual. Off the field, he's supposed to be a really lovely guy.
Yeah.
And I think
I'm sure
that's what they say about all dictators.
Yeah.
That's true. He's also he's kind to animals, and he loves his mother as well. I know. All these things are true. However, if it's a 90th minute and he has to commit the tactical foul to stop his team going out of the car, that's why Real Madrid with the mediocre team keep winning champions. Not this year, but previous years, just keep winning endless.
Okay. As a counter argument, I'm going to go to the Italians. So we spoke about Paolo Maldini previously. How Paolo Maldini, one of the most graceful defenders of his time, so a defender like for like. And he would famously say that for him, a successful game or a really good game for him was one where he didn't have to make that late challenge, or he didn't have to commit the foul, that he would look at his kit and there was no mud on it. He didn't have to slide down because he'd read the game. So another way to interpret Ramos's ruthlessness is that he lacks perception, and that he has to do these things in order to compensate for his lack of perception. And another Italian that I was just thinking of while you was talking is, but he's not a defender, is Andrea Pirlo. Pirlo, he's just been appointed as Juventus manager. He played in a defensive midfield role, deep-lying defensive midfielder, but he dictated the game, and his game wasn't about power. His game wasn't about intimidation. His game was all about grace and vision, right?
Oops.
And
which I respect deeply.
I feel the same as Pedro about this. To me, a good game isn't one where you have to, at all costs, annihilate the other team. and I you know, I say always that, you know, Dennis Bergkamp's my favorite Arsenal player. I mean, I do like Ian Wright and Patrick Vieira. You know, I also like Eric Cantona, you know, because I think that these are characters, and you know, it's one of the things I was listening to Ian Wright having an interview with Dennis Bergkamp about it when he left Italy, and he said to him that when he was in Italy, it was like a job. It wasn't fun. It wasn't a game anymore. He kind of lost perspective on the enjoyment of doing something. And I think that's the same with architecture. You know, yes, it's work, but it's also about doing something because you want to and you enjoy it. And when it all comes together, there's such a satisfaction from it that it's you know, it's a great feeling. And you know, he was talking about the invincible year, you know, when Arsenal played so well, and he said, like, you know, it was like perfection. And if you can do that in a project or whatever, but it's also work, you know, this is the thing. It's about having put in the work and then forgetting that it's work, and that you can actually just see it as something that you can enjoy.
The joy.
And doing it, you know, and you're working together.
Yeah. On that, I would say that I reckon Ramos enjoys his ruthlessness.
I feel like that's probably true. I mean, but I think also that he allows teams to operate better because he does the kind of grunt work that nobody else wants to do, or people want to kind of, you know, so Ronaldo can stay up the field and Benzema can stay up the field and score beautiful goals because he's doing all the kind of, so in a way, Pedro, I would suggest that one of the reasons he has to do this is because he's so exposed, because you've got all these amazing midfielders ahead of him, like Modric and Toni Kroos, and, like, you know, playing these beautiful, kind of gorgeous passes with a bit of swerve on them directly to somebody's foot who, you know, does a back flick and it comes directly to Benzema who nods it down, and then, you know, Ronaldo scores to the far post. But that only happens because somebody's looking up the back door.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you to Susanna for reminding us and bringing us back to architecture, that this is an architectural event after all. Related, I've forgotten all about that. Yeah, I've forgotten all about that. So I'm going to chime in now with who I'm going to speak about in praise of, and I'm going to try and relate it back to architecture, and it's the Argentine manager Marcelo Bielsa, who is currently enjoying lots of success with Leeds. He's been promoted with Leeds into the Premier League. So we're going to be seeing him in England's top flight next season. But the reason I've chosen Bielsa is I've been in awe of him for many, many years as a student of the game. And I think as architects, especially those architects of us, those amongst us that kind of that teach and practice at the same time, that teach, that have, for us, it's a vocation. And I get the sense that for Bielsa, the game for him is also a vocation, that it's a way of life, that the game chose him and not the other way around. And sometimes I feel that way about architecture, that it's a vocation, but he embraces it with all warts and all. And there was something that I read about him the other day where he was saying that he actually is a specialist in failure, that he doesn't consider himself successful. Like this is about standards. So his standards are so high that he remembers the defeats more often than the glory. Whereas someone like Mourinho might be chanting. Well, Mourinho, every opportunity he gets, he talks about how much he's won. Whereas Bielsa talks about how much he's lost, and the lessons he wants to learn from that. And also as architects, you know, the struggle, whether it's financial, whether it's creative, whether it's, you know, trying to get recognition, all of these struggles. And the other reason I like Bielsa is because he's an innovator. That for him, that's the way to exist. That's the way he practices, actually, through innovation. So he's been responsible for many of the modern game's innovations, admittedly on the back of some of the European coaches like the Italians, but the high pressing line, the kind of modern 3-4-3. That's Bielsa. That's Bielsa. He was using that back in the 80s in Argentina. Yeah, the false nine. That's Bielsa. Again, Bielsa is I don't know, but wrong analogy because it's a wrong discipline. But from cooking, El Bulli from Spain, pronounced in English El Bulli. So they are the world's elite restaurant, and the innovations they were cooking up in their kitchens 10, 15 years ago are recognized as the avant-garde now, but they actually invented it. So I'm going to go over now to Susanna for your thoughts.
I mean, I was just thinking about this thing about being a manager, you know, and one of the important things about, and this is why I think a good manager is and you know, I'm just in education, you know, I don't practice in the sense of making constructed buildings or anything like that. And for me, it's very much being able to see what is in someone and bringing that out and enabling that to occur. And I think good managers manage that, you know, and you need to have the trust of the team. You know, the players need to trust the manager and vice versa. And that's the same, I think, in education, and I think, you know, maybe in practice as well, you know, in a more straightforward form, where you need this kind of wanting to do the best for the totality at one level. I mean, slightly different in education, where, you know, we tend to teach more at an individual, trying to hone the individual up, you know, because we're not actually doing what an office does, which is like we've got lots of people doing together the same project. So I you know, I think that that's something that I see about people, is that sometimes they may be weak at something else, but you can actually hone them up to what they're strong, you know, and make that very powerful.
Yeah, so as architects, we're all kind of managers, mini managers of our environments, like a football manager would be.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know,
we're also kind of, sorry, Susanne.
No, keep going.
No, I was the thing that struck me about what you both said is that this idea of kind of methodology and identity in what we do and what we try and do and what we kind of try to put out in the world. But I also love the idea of Bielsa as, you know, if he was an architect, he'd actually be a fictional character for me. I can't remember the name of that guy in Fountainhead. Maybe like that kind of just uncompromising, or, you know, just a kind of uncompromising, almost one-dimensional, but just like that. This is the only thing that matters, and there's something heroic about that and admirable about that. Completely impractical in many ways. But it'd be interesting to see how practical that is in the Premier League with Leeds. But he's made it happen. He's made it happen in the Championship, so I suppose that proves something. But just this kind of the idea of this guy who comes and sits on the bucket and thinks about football. Even just, you know, it sits on what is it? Is it an ice bucket or something that he sits on during the game?
Yeah, and you know why he does that? Because that gives him the most optimized view of the pitch. That's why he does that.
Vantage, yeah, that's incredible. Just kind of watching people's legs skitter around a football pitch, and I mean, I wonder what's the analogy of that viewing in practice or in an architecture studio or in a university studio.
What do you mean?
So this is the idea of design identity or an identity.
I don't know. It's weird, isn't it? Because one of the things about, I think, great managers and great teams is they're trying to pursue a certain type of vision. And when they get that freedom to do so, it may turn out to be a failure, an utter failure. But, you know, I mean, I was just watching Brian Clough. I just found him absolutely hilarious. You know, he said when Arsene Wenger and Arsenal had that fantastic season, he said watching Arsenal caress the football was like how he wanted to caress Marilyn Monroe, and I just loved that, you know, and I think that, you know, managers and, you know, officers need to have, I would say, a vision that somehow those that are in it share.
Yeah.
Right. And then when people are into that, they are often going to be quite successful, because there is an empathy and a want to do that thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think the best teams and the best offices, the best architectural offices, or the best architectural studios, whether they're in academia or whether they're in practice or whether they're in both, have a clear identity. And I draw strong parallels between the Barcelona team of the late 2000s and that precisely, that when people like Rijkaard took over, when Guardiola took over, what they wanted to do was have a clear identity, that regardless of who was on the pitch, everyone understood how they played. And I think that the great design engines of architecture also have that. That regardless of the roster, whether it's, you know, whether you've got a team of 20 or you're a team of 100, whether you've got a team of technologists or you've got a team of, you know, incredible drawers or makers, everyone understands what the ethos is, that design identity. And the best teams
very
have got that.
accommodating as well. It's a very accommodating kind of framework as well, isn't it? Because it accepts, I mean, you can have that kind of Milan of Rigasaki, but then you drop in Rijkaard and Hullet, who do different jobs, and Van Basten as well, and they make that happen. Or you have a studio where, as you said, somebody's a maker, somebody's a kind of the thinker, somebody just, you know, making sure that, you know, just checking somebody's quality control and checking everyone else's drawings, but making sure that things are kind of ticking over. And just so that kind of clarity is quite interesting. Although we'll enjoy the kind of slightly chaotic moments. Is it, do you both think it's a kind of romantic aspiration for practice in studios to have this clarity? How easy is that to do outside of academia, actually? And outside of it, is it more of one of these things where maybe one?
Well, it's as Andy Warhol. It's as Andy Warhol says, you know, sometimes you have to bring home the bacon.
True.
What does that mean, Susanna? What does that mean?
It means that you have to do things which bring in money.
Right. Ruthlessness. Like, so
no, it's
here
not
am
ruthlessness. It's not ruthlessness. It's understanding that you have, look, you know, I don't know, you know, if you're running a large practice, you've got a lot of mouths to feed.
Yeah.
You know, you know, and you know, being picky and choosy is one thing. I mean, that's a great place to be if you can be picky and choosy. You know, the Smithson's very famous, and he never wanted to do 3 projects at a time or less, right? And very often people aren't in that position to pick and choose, especially if they've got mouths to feed. And so this is when Andy Warhol says, I'm going to have to bring home the bacon, which is when he started his whole series of screen printings.
So in a way, it's about monetizing what you do without losing that integrity or that intensity.
I would put it differently. Because I would suggest that that isn't incompatible with the idea of a kind of clarity. So if I think of Alex Ferguson, for instance, he won stuff, but he had various people in his team who, by themselves, like I'm thinking of Darren Fletcher and John O'Shea in particular, were not necessarily well-beating football players. They were modest talents. Let's be fair, but they were in this kind of framework with the Cantonars that allowed everyone to flourish as a team and to kind of produce and to everyone to get the best out of each other. So I'm not sure that it's mutually exclusive. Bringing home the bacon is possible with a bit of flair and a bit of kind of...
Well, precisely. I mean, we can't argue that Andy Warhol was without flair. You know, he did it with flair. But the thing is that there are moments when you realize you have to do jobs which may require you to somehow keep your vision, but you realize that we all know this, you know, that we have projects where we have to do the best that we can, because that's the case, you know. And architects, I think, in particular, try to do this all the time. They try to effectively overwork the project, right? Giving their time up, right? Because they want to have their vision realized, right? So they're willing to sacrifice.
Yeah. And as an architect, as architects, we have to do that, right? If we love it, good design takes time, takes effort, takes resource, and often the fee doesn't reflect that because of the market forces. So we choose to sacrifice that actually for our art.
I think it's to do with ego, and it's to do with wanting to show someone what we can do. And you know, nobody knows where their best job's going to come from, which is why a lot of architects will do a tiny job, you know.
Yeah.
You know, because nobody knows that. And I think, you know, that in football, you know, people have made sacrifices, I do think, because they wanted to say, you know, look, you know, you could argue that Dennis Bergkamp came to Arsenal at a time when he was playing very, very badly, you know, from Italy.
Yeah, wasn't he struggling at Inter at the time?
Yeah, you know, and so this was an opportunity for him, you know, because I suspect that playing at Inter was slightly higher up than being at Arsenal.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. At that time, Arsenal weren't considered a major European side at that time.
Yeah.
So this makes me think about the evolution of the game and how, as architects, we do have to keep evolving. And one of the things I'm very interested in football is tactics, footballing tactics, and how they are very rarely static, and they are constantly evolving. So, for example, at the moment, it's very rare that you have a team playing with two strikers up front. Whereas, you know, 10 years ago, it was common. And if we go back even further, it was the standard model. Now as you have one powerful centre forward acting as a battering ram, and then you've got 4 or 5 midfielders who are doing the attacking and scoring the goals. And as architects, we also have to keep constantly evolving. You know, the ideas that we were taught at our schools or in our training, then when we first graduate, then when we first get our, you know, we get our first commission, and then you start getting bigger commissions and more things change. You have to keep evolving tactically. So, and I see lots of parallels between the game and architecture.
I almost feel like this is where the analogy kind of becomes a bit stretched, because in the sense I'll say why, because we are kind of, we train to be imaginative. It's kind of our job to be restlessly innovative and to be thinking about. I'm not sure all football managers are. I think the successful ones like Bielsa and Guardiola and Ferguson to some extent and Wenger did become that way because they were kind of almost that's why they stood out. Whereas lots of managers are kind of it seems unfair to say, but it's also true, quite pedestrian in the way that they look at the world, and it's, you know, that's the way it's always been done, so that's the way we'll do it. And they're almost like, without being rude to any other built environment disciplines, but they're almost like they're kind of some of the consultants that we try and bring along with us and convince that this can be done. So architects are probably more like they're kind of innovative and imaginative managers, more than the kind of I don't know, staid consultants.
But isn't that what we'd like to think? Isn't that the architect's ego?
Fair enough.
We want to take credit for all the interesting.
I mean, I think what I find fantastic about football and why it is a beautiful game is it just needs a ball. It needs some flat surface, which may be dirt or sand or grass. And then it's a bit like bacteria. And then from it, you get an incredible variety and unexpected diversity from the various movements of the different participants. You know, and that's what I find absolutely amazing about it. You know, no game is the same, even though it actually comes from a very, very simple premise, a very simple evolutionary premise. You know, and that's why I think it's you know, the variations within it are extraordinary.
And the different culturally, football is an expression of its environment or of its nations. So the Colombian football team, I was born in Colombia. So the Colombian football team has over the last 30 or 40 years developed a very patient, some would say, passing game. This is way before tiki-taka, way before tiki-taka. And Colombians are very relaxed and laid back. And it's often written about in Colombian football journalism how the national team is a physical representation of cultural attitudes. And Brazilian football, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, isn't that a paradox as well, though? So it's kind of, you were telling me, I've forgotten his name, but the Hungarian guy who went from Hungary, I think he managed Honvéd or somebody in Hungary, went across, including Ferenc Puskás, the famous player from the 1950s, and then he went across to South America and went to various countries, Uruguay, Colombia, Brazil, and established this kind of the basis of this. So it's both. It's so interesting how it's both this kind of repository of a national soul, but also it's very cosmopolitan and global.
Yeah,
it's a thing that you know.
That goes back to Susanne's point about the universal nature of the game. And what you're talking about as a football coach, but this was way back in the kind of early 1900s. That footballing innovation, in the 100 years ago, was actually in Scotland. Believe it or not, it was actually in Scotland, and there was these incredibly innovative, influential Scottish managers. Because football, as we all know, was born in England. And then the Scots took it over and they began to actually innovate tactically because the English would just pump the ball up and then 10 men would run after it. But the Scots actually tried to play it along the ground. They used their heads. So they started developing what's the modern equivalent of I think it was a flat back six back then. And then some Scottish managers, for some reason, ended up in Hungary. And then there was a mini colony of new way of thinking. And then those Hungarian coaches in the early 1900s, 1910, 1920s, somehow made their way to Brazil. And there the advent of the fullback as a wing back, as the defender, this deep lying player that would attack along the wings, that was born. And that became part of the Brazilian identity. And that's why we had all this long tradition of Brazilian fullbacks, but I also think
it reminds me of modernism. It reminds me of kind of international modernism.
Yeah,
how that spread to.
But I also think environment plays a big role in this, and I wonder if the Colombian team were European, you know, I wonder because it can get very, very hot, very, very humid. It's like London today. This feels like Colombia, and therefore you're going to play a slow passing game. You're not going to want to be running around lots and lots and lots. So I think environment also plays an aspect in the evolution of the game.
Well, I mean, if it had been, where is it? Was it in Qatar? It's supposed to be in Qatar this year?
Yeah.
It's going to be 2022. If it happens, 2022, Qatar.
It would have been boiling. It would have been boiling.
Yeah. So this brings us on to the next point about tribalism. Tribalism in football and in architecture. So, David, what are your thoughts on the tribalistic nature of the two?
This is so interesting. This is almost a kind of. You might come back to me on that one. I'm not sure I've got a clear idea. I'm not sure I've got a kind of formed idea of that. It's more of an instinct on my part. I support my football team, and I enjoy castigating other football teams, particularly if they're Tottenham. Is where I stand on that, basically. But I don't know how that translates to architecture.
Well, I think you have people that are what you might consider part of your family. You know, that tribalism, they're part of your family. These are, you know, people that you instinctively feel you belong to. And then you can also appreciate those that are outside of, let's say, your you know, I always say I'm personally a maximalist. You know, I'm not a minimalist. So that doesn't mean I can't enjoy minimalism. It just means that I just like exuberance. I like, you know, things like that. But I can appreciate when someone else is different, because it's a bit like when you see a good goal. It doesn't matter who's scored it. You know, that's what I found quite interesting. You know, today when I was looking at, I suppose, the past, you know, where you look at people playing a game, they're passing. I mean, I couldn't believe the state of the pitches, you know, in the 70s. I mean, there were mud fields effectively. You know, no modern Premier League footballer would play on a pitch like that because of the injury levels, you know, and the ball was made out of leather, it was really heavy, you know, all that sort of business. But that's not
and the goalpost, nobody talks about it. The goalpost was square. Have you ever been hit by one of those things? Have you ever run into one of?
I told you I don't play. But the point is, there's nothing to do with. I mean, the thing that I find, and we talked about this, about the thing about being at a live football match, or even being at a pub watching it on let's say Sky or whatever. It's the camaraderie that you get, you know, and you know being on the away bus, you know, and I even see it, you know, when people are returning back from games, you know, on the underground, you know, they all got their pamphlet, the program, and you know, you can see which team lost because you know they're all down. You know, and it's a thing that bonds you together, but that doesn't mean you need to start a war. You know, I mean, some people obviously do take it to extremes, but it's a thing that you can talk about.
Yeah, and I suppose as architects and designers, we also look for common ground, people that we can relate to, ideas we can relate to. So if one particularly enjoys modernism, and you describe yourself as a modernist architect, or if the drawing is sacred to you, and therefore you feel comfortable around like-minded designers, or for you, if making buildings with big foundations, that's where you get your rocks off, you know, you're drawn to that. So I do think there is a tribalistic nature in architecture, and the more confident we get in our design identities, the more filtered I'm finding with this myself, the more filtered I become about who I choose becomes my influences, the people I talk to, and I reject a lot more. And I think as a fan of football, you also, as a child, you talk to every supporter, right? You talk to Liverpool fans, Arsenal fans, Sunderland fans. But then as you get older, you're like David, I'm not talking to any Spurs fans. I just don't have the bandwidth to deal with it.
That's a bit mean.
But it's true.
Can I just say, for the avoidance of doubt, I will condescend to talk to Tottenham supporters. I'm not like that.
You are willing to go down that level to that level.
Well, you see,
I'm open.
I mean, I have to say, as an Arsenal supporter, I've never really understood the Arsenal-Tottenham rivalry, but that's because, you know, I only came to this country later in life, you know, and so I don't feel any strong feelings for Tottenham, whereas I absolutely cannot stand Chelsea, you know. You know, I feel more strongly about them than or Leeds United, for instance, another team I don't like, you know, but, you know, it's just one of those things. I don't feel particular, and it's maybe because every time that somehow Arsenal managed to get the upper hand on Tottenham, you know, whether it's, you know, the pizzas they ate in the hotel room that, you know, gave them, you know, indigestion, or like even now that we've won the FA Cup, you know, now they've got to go and play all these games, you know, I don't have that feeling of animosity towards Tottenham supporters.
To be fair to
It
Tottenham,
has been, do you know what?
they've now got a wonderful new ground that I really want to see inside. Have you seen the new White Hart Lane from the outside?
I must say, I'm talking about architecture. I am really not a fan of that stadium.
Really? Have you seen it from the
Oh,
outside? It looks.
I have. There we go. I tell you what would have been. I'm sorry, Susanna, but what would have been a beautiful stadium is the new Chelsea, or the Chelsea stadium that may not happen now. It's really funny. Herzog and de Meuron have this thing about they're the curse of death if you get them to design your stadiums, because they were supposed to do one for Portsmouth about 10 years ago, and that team went into free fall and fell apart, and now are in the lowest division, or a very low division, and the whole Chelsea thing didn't happen because of Abramovich. So who knows what's next? They did do one for Bordeaux in the they've done the Bordeaux stadium, which actually did get built. That was part of Euro 2016, if I remember correctly, which is a kind of elegant. I don't know if you remember. It's a kind of white elegant thing with loads of columns defining the kind of perimeter around it. But it is interesting to listen to both of you in terms of the tribalism thing, in terms of both football and architecture. First of all, it's a question more than anything else, in that football-wise, this phenomenon of having the second team. So whilst you are tribal to your team, actually an under kind of remembered thing is that it's not just that you don't like another team. It's actually that you often have a soft spot for a third team or a lower division team. That's an interesting thing, and I'm being interested in how you both think that applies to architecture. But also in architecture, it's always baffled me why there has to be tribalism in architecture. Like what you like, but why is it important for other people to not like what they like? I've never quite understood that. Because I enjoy the kind of heterogeneity of allowing lots of different people to do bonkers things in a way that I would never do, but are interesting, and it might kind of shift the conversation forward in a particular direction. Or it's a bit, for me, it's a kind of research thing, isn't it? You don't say to a scientist, this research project, not that research project. How dare you do that research project? That's ridiculous. What are you thinking? Which for me is kind of
tribalism in scientists. I don't agree with that.
There probably are. But I suppose I've been baffled by it, is what I'm saying. Professionally, I'm baffled by it.
No, look, there've been famous feuds, you know, we can talk about, you know, the rivalry between, let's say, Ferguson and Arsene Wenger, or Arsene Wenger with Mourinho. And these rivalries also exist in architecture, where, you know, Zumthor famously doesn't like, I can't remember who, it's just one of those things, you know, where it's a position, you have a position, and sometimes, you know, it's actually quite petty and silly, obviously, and other times it's well-founded.
Yeah, I think this brings us nicely onto one of our other points, which is about value, and how you value success, and how you might value success as a designer, or as a football player or manager. And we were talking previously about Mourinho versus Wenger, whereas Mourinho has won trophies, but Wenger left a more lasting legacy. And also Mourinho has a very finite shelf life, whereas Wenger was 20 years, was it, Susanna, at Arsenal? So the value of things, I think maybe that's tribalism is one thing in both architecture and football, but also what you value in architecture and football.
Susanne, do you want to come in on that?
I think you know, what I say to the students is that, you know, one of the things that Corb talked about was he felt it was very important to enable people to live life well, and that's what he wanted his architecture to do. And I think, to me, you know, that's something I also value. I also value the idea that my students feel confident that they can go out into the world, that they haven't, they are able to do that, and they can say no to things, that for me matters more than winning.
Whereas you're a fan of Mourinho, right, David? The ruthlessness.
It is interesting. So I'm going to contradict myself completely, because I think I admire, more than a fan, I admire certain things about what he does, but not others. I think more than Sergio Ramos, I don't. He's difficult to like, but I don't think he minds that. But I admire somebody who, by his bootstraps, like he said, he wasn't a player, came from nowhere. He won the Champions League with a really, really kind of unfancied team. And then he won the Champions League again with more fancy teams, which is really rare, which is really hard to do, like twice. He's won leagues everywhere. He's won trophies everywhere. So that's hard to kind of look past. But I think the flaw is exactly what you and Susanne have pointed out, which is that what's the work? What's the legacy? And when you look back, does anybody really want to kind of watch a Mourinho match back in 30 years' time? I doubt it. Was it Jorge Valdano said it was like watching shit on a stick between Mourinho and Mourinho and Benitez? And God forbid, can you imagine doing a piece of work or building a space or something like that to somebody, and you get that kind of review? That would be crushing.
It's ironic that Mourinho coined the park the bus analogy, right? When I can't remember which team it was. I think it was Southampton, and they just defended.
I think it was West Ham.
Was it West Ham? Was it you?
It was against West Ham, yeah.
And they just defended for 90 minutes, and in a press conference, Mourinho came out and said, "Well, they part their whole 11 men behind the ball, and the team bus," and that's effectively what he's become, and I think that's really ironic.
It's so true, yeah. It's become a parody of his own one-liners.
Yeah. So maybe the moral in that story is be careful with your ruthlessness, where it might take you. Don't lose your moral compass. Be aware of
that's a beautiful spiritual lesson. I wonder, we've only got a short while to go, so should we take in some questions from? There's a couple of people who've dropped in some questions, and actually there's not that many people here, so if anyone else wanted to chip in and say anything.
Yes, let's open up the floor to questions.
Experimental. This is, as Susanne was saying, is this a kind of heroic failure? But it's we're going for it. As a
I mean, I'm just looking at the chat, and someone said about the diets, and that kind of innovation that Arsene Wenger brought in. It was quite amazing, because when I was watching that Brian Clough film, The Damned United, and then there was another one, The Miracle. I mean, it's quite amazing, because people would drink. He's in the movie, he starts off drinking in the car, which I remember people used to do in the 70s. There was no seat belts, nothing, and things have changed, and there was a lot of kicking around. Then there's another question here about the analogy between football and one of economics.
Should we bring them in? Should I grab them?
yes, please.
Yes, please.
They can both unmute themselves. Sorry to interrupt. But yeah, carry on.
So Alessandro and Joseph.
Hi, it's Alessandro here.
Hi, Alessandro. Welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, I've just really enjoyed this talk. I'm surprised no one's done it before.
Thank you.
And should definitely be a series. Should be an ongoing thing.
Well, the way this came about, Alessandro, is David and I talk a lot, and about architecture. and we always end up on football anecdotes, and whenever I'm around Susanna, the conversation often drifts to Arsenal. So I thought, let's put these ingredients together and let's film it, and let's see what happens. This is how it came about. But back to you. Sorry.
It's great. No, well, it's great. I mean, I teach at the Birmingham School of Architecture. and design.
Great.
But my boss, who's now leaving to go to Manchester, he's a massive Man City fan as well. So there's often kind of rivalry between that. But yeah, it's quite interesting about some of the things you were talking about, tactics and spatial formation and tribalism as well. It's often like kind of rooted in family ties or even place and context. But there's even stuff like tribalism in European countries. Like you often have your local team, but you also support one of the big teams as well, and that's dependent on the village that you're from and the kind of historic connection that a village might have with Turin or with Milan and so on. So there's interesting ideas about tribalism, but then that's slightly different to the one in Spain as well. So I just thought it was generally like really fascinating kind of chat, and thank you for it.
Thank you.
I mean, it's very interesting.
Before you go, who do you support?
So I was just going to ask
Who do I support?
Sorry. Yeah.
I'm a Gooner.
Okay. All right. Let's move swiftly on.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting talking about, like, I try to go, if it's the season and I'm on a field trip or I'm on I don't call it holiday. I don't really like going on holiday. I like to go visit places. And if there is a game on, you know, like even when I went to Detroit, for instance, I went to watch a basketball game. I try to watch the local game because I do think that it's an important part of culture and an important part of understanding a place. And it is very, very interesting when you go to, you know, I remember being in Bilbao when there was a game on, you know, and in Spain, for instance, you know, the home games are so much more local. You know, you don't get a lot of away people, etc. You know, and you know, like I remember going to a game in Bremen, in Werder Bremen, for Werder Bremen. Well, it was actually a Champions League game between Arsenal and Werder Bremen, so I was on the away side. And you know that people cycle to the stadium, and you just see the you know, all these bicycles outside. You know, people walking there. It's a different feel from, I think, in London, where we have a very different football culture. I do think, and that's what I do find quite fascinating. And I did mention to both David and Pedro, you know, when I went to Barcelona and I went into that stadium, I couldn't believe how steep it was. Actually, I got a fear of heights.
Susanna, we should go to a game in Colombia. They are fascinating.
I would love to. I'd love to go to that really big,
visceral experiences.
Well, the one in Mexico isn't. I can't remember how big that stadium is, but if you get all those voices in there, the voice, the feeling of that volume of voice, you know, and that's why I think, like, you know, with now with lockdown, you know, I really feel for the players, you know, because, you know, I was just listening to, you know, Dennis talking about how he could hear people saying 1 more year, Dennis, and how that lifted him up. And I think that, you know, we're having these games which are like they're like
exhibition matches. They're like exhibition matches, right?
They don't feel right.
Yeah.
Should we quickly jump on to Joseph's question just before we come to the end, before the final whistle?
Yeah, it's not particularly enlightened. It was just a question. Actually, my football bio, they used to play for Fulham Juniors until under 14 level.
Oh my God.
Wow.
I invented the right-footed fullback.
You invented it. You're responsible for the right-footed fullback.
No, the right-footed left-back.
Right-footed left-back. You're the person responsible for that innovation. Okay.
There was no one, because there was a real dearth of people who were left-footed in the Fulham.
That's right. Yeah.
I was I'm ambidextrous, so I can kick either foot, but I prefer to kick on my right. So the whole Ashley Young owes me his career.
And you kept it all up for architecture. I don't know what you and Pedro were thinking.
Yeah, you know, it'd be interesting to have like a survey of ex-football players that are now architects and the team we'd have. Like there's a thing at the Bartlett that a lot of famous musicians have gone there and didn't finish their training and went on to have stellar careers in music and have done very, very well in music. It'd be interesting to do the same for architecture. So we've got a left back that plays with his right foot.
Yeah, I was actually the goalkeeper, but I used to play left back
Utility
as well. And then my question is one of
You
economic.
know what? Oh, go on. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just a question about like the domination of certain teams and the inability. So on one hand, you have the mega riches of people like Man City, but then you have people like Wigan under threat from poor ownership and this inability for the wider economic structure to spread its wealth to different, and actually that connection for local towns or where the football club is a particularly important part of the economy to suddenly disappear. You sort of wonder the same with architecture, where you have certain practice eating up all the opportunities and making it harder for those below to actually get opportunities. It seems to be maybe it's just like Western economies, just that thing that links them. But it just seems there does seem to be the romance of the game gets kicked out when you sort of know inevitably who the 5 teams going for the league will be. And then you have an organisation like Leicester, which is like what happens when a practice of 2 beats everyone else to like an open competition. Like it's like Asif Khan doing Museum of London. It's like the Champions League.
Susanna, do you want to talk? Because you talked of your answers. You talked about the Yokohama moment in architecture. Maybe.
Well, I talked about the FA Cup and these kinds of cups where you have lower league teams being able. Yeah, it's being I mean, I personally am not a great fan of the FA Cup, but I do think it is important in the sense that you want to see lower league teams have a chance of beating one of the giants. And I do feel that in architecture as well. I would love more open competitions. I would love, for younger practices to have the same kind, a lot of things have changed since, in my time, where, we talked about Yokohama, which was an open competition, but, I remember the first competition where you were asked for your, financial details was for, I think, a library or museum in Ireland. You couldn't just enter it, but whereas prior to this, a lot of competitions were open to everybody, and some people were invited. There may be 6 people invited, yet it was open to everybody else. But now what you have is financial checks and all these sorts of things, which I think makes it very, very difficult for young practices to start out by themselves. And I think most people that do break it have actually come through a larger practice.
Yeah, I think in terms of tying it back to football, what will happen is that it effectively creates a vacuum of talent. And so at the moment, the reason players want to play in the Premier League is because we pay the most. It's the wealthiest league. And before that it was the Spanish league, and then before that it was the Italian league. But it's very, very rare that the most wealthy league also has a successful national side. And what's going to happen is it creates opportunities for other environments to become fertile creative grounds. And I think it's no coincidence that Italy didn't actually win anything when they were the most, in the 90s, they were the wealthy league. And it's similarly with Spain in a way, and now in England. So I think whilst the decision makers think they're actually winning, what they're doing is they're losing this cultural and creative heritage, and it'll just shift somewhere else. So right now we don't even know about it, and you won't know about it till it's too late in football and in architecture. Right now there's this incredibly fertile environment that we haven't heard of yet through our mainstream channels that's out there. Yeah, exactly. It's in Algeria, or it's in Uruguay, or it's in Southern California, but it's out there. And it's because we have created this vacuum and the talent moves somewhere else.
And big clubs take all our best players, like Ryan Sessegnon. There's a whole history of amazingly young Harvey Elliott, Liverpool, sort of local players at the small clubs. support, get them their first go, and then they get sold off for was quite a small amount of money. So contract gets wound down, and then actually the talent isn't invested in the places.
Well, what happens is, I mean, this happens in design, in patents, for instance, where you'll get. I mean, my sister's a patent examiner, and people like Sony, people like Apple or whatever, they will buy up all the interesting ideas because they want to stop them from evolving. And you see, I can imagine that you have these massive squads, in football, and basically what they're doing is they're trying to prevent lower teams getting a talent. And so what has to happen is those people, that want to play have to accept that they have to be paid less to get a game, and it's very interesting, just listening, as I said, I listened to Dennis today, talking to Ian Wright, he said, like, the reason why he quit football was because he realized he wasn't going to get to play, and his body, it was beyond his body. Now the trouble is that with patents, for instance, you may have a great shelving system, but if let's say Vitra buy it up and never want to produce it, it'll never see the light of day.
Rosie, we're over time. Is it time to wrap things up?
If you're ready to wrap up, are you ready? No, I mean, as in, like, I mean, I'm enjoying listening to this. I feel like I'm overhearing a conversation in a pub. It feels like a pleasure to listen in. But yeah,
how about final words from David and Susanna?
That would be great. Yeah,
David, final words. You're muted. You're muted, David.
Sorry about that. This is the internet's meme. You're muted. But I am. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed talking about it with great company, and hopefully we can do it again. Yeah, not much more to say.
Susanna, final thoughts?
I can't wait to go to a proper game. I mean, I have to say, I really enjoyed the FA Cup, which was the first game I'd seen all season, because Arsenal have been abysmal this whole season. They managed to win something, but I miss things like as I say, it's about the company of people together in a all feeling a similar emotion, or maybe even an antagonistic emotion, because they may be on the opposing team, and to see people, it's a kind of, I can't remember what the term is, but there's a term when everybody has the same feeling, a kind of exaltation, and I think that that's not going to be achievable in our lockdown mode.
True. And from me, I'm just going to leave on. I'm really looking forward to seeing Marcelo Bielsa in the Premier League next season. Someone who's both a professor and a student of the game. And I think we're all in for a treat.